Welcome to our webinar on what is highly effective practice. What will make the difference in your classroom and how will you know? Part of our last webinar was looking at features of highly effective schools, and there were things there that made us think more carefully about our practice as a school. But now we ask that you consider your practice in your classroom. We're asking you to now gather the data, and from that data you're gathering from your classroom, you will begin to see gaps, you'll begin to see where interventions and improvements could take place and be a focus for your case study for improvement. All of these things must be based on that data, but your next selection is very, very important. What is it will make the difference? Now, there is a range of evidence out there on what will make that difference, and what is a bit of a minefield for you at this point will be choosing and selecting what you will do to make that difference in your class. And we do have lots of research on the effectiveness and improvement research on schools as a whole, and as I say, we have had a look at those highly effective features of high performing schools. But what I think we must be acutely aware of is the additional research that perhaps sits alongside or sits a bit deeper in terms of closing the gap in our primary schools. And to guide you through this minefield, we would like today to consider what is highly effective practice and what will make that difference in your classroom. As you begin to consider effectiveness of a particular intervention, we look towards John Hattie's visible thinking research, and a very, very well-known and prolific researcher, John Hattie, has a career spanning over 20 to 30 years in this field and around the world, and has researched many, many topics about what works best. He's a Professor of Education and Director of Melbourne Education Research Institute and has been since 2011, but his practices have taken him around the world, and as we can see, almost 1,200 different meta-analysis research have been conducted by him and his team, with over 80,000 studies on absolutely everything that you could possibly think of having an impact or an effect on our students. He has conducted these with a tremendous range that can add credibility to his research when he has worked with over 250 million students. What is important about his research is that his drive is to discover the most positive impacts on achievement. It is to raise achievement and on what works best. And it is from regular classrooms and it is from regular classwork, and something that we should look to see what will have that effectiveness, especially when we're considering the interventions that have been informed by the data that we have conducted and carried out. As we start to understand John Hattie's work, we look at exactly what he means by effect sizes. John Hattie is a champion of teachers and a champion of educators, and recognising that what we do on the whole in our classrooms does make a difference on the whole. However, there are different degrees and there are different influences on achievement, and while we recognise that, we should also be aware of those things that actually can decrease achievement. So we have to ask ourselves, what is the effect? What's the effect of what we are doing? His question is, what works best? That's his mantra, that's his strapline. He also says, know thy impact. And of course, that's exactly what we're about in IOC, is about that impact and being able to measure that impact. So he's done that work for us. He knows what has made the impact, and he knows how to measure that. Okay, so this illustration here, this graph here, is about how effect sizes are evaluated. So this is how he arrives at his conclusions. As we say, between 95 and 90% of everything that we do in our classrooms will not have a negative impact on our children's attainment. As we see around here, the sort of amber are things that will not have a tremendous impact. They will not have that influence that we are looking for. Effect sizes of 0.4 or more is what we aspire to. Effect sizes of 0.4 is when a child will have around a year's growth for a year's input. And that is this green zone that we're looking at here. This is what we're aspiring to, that 0.4, where we see that result from the year that we have, the input that the child received, to gaining that year's typical growth or more in terms of their progress. Okay, so that is what we're aspiring to here. And very much when we've looked nationally, we see the amber here, we see the average, we see the things that will have minor impact, will have things just ticking over. And what we do know is that we don't want to be average. We don't want to have things just not fulfilling children's potential, not challenging children, and just almost treading water. So these kind of interventions that stick here, this type of practice that sits around this amber here, you can see from 0 to up to the 4 are things that perhaps we can get caught up too much on a daily basis and not perhaps aspire too much to these things that we know make the difference, 0.4 and more. Now there's the red zone that you can see here, 0 and then into the negative, so that will have a negative impact on children's attainment, are a relatively small number. And we will go on and explore as to what kind of things these are, and avoid, of course, at all costs. But it's things like children repeating a year. It's things like children being excluded or suspended or expelled from school. Those are the type of things that will have that negative impact. So it's important to see that spread. It's important to keep a hold of that first do no harm, but of course is that aspirational, that we want to do things that will have that bigger impact on our children. And what are they? Here we have our highly effective strategies. Here we have our high hitters, our big hitters, and some of them are particularly effective. So when you are considering the intervention that you are going to choose, that you're going to are going to focus on in your classroom, it's important to look at these, and we direct you to Hattie's work around effect sizes. And we'll also have a short video from Hattie himself presenting on these things at the end of this webinar for you to tune into. But you can see up here with teacher estimates of achievement is absolutely significant, absolutely significant. And what that means is, and Hattie explains it in his video, is knowing your children's starting point. It's knowing where they are, it's knowing where to build on, or what to build on. And of course, effective practice there is around activating prior knowledge as part of a highly effective teaching and learning experience for children. So you can see the impact that that will have. That's also about then setting realistic goals for children. It's about sharing those goals. It's about children knowing what success looks like, and Hattie talks about that. And you know that that happens when we share effective learning intentions and success criteria. And although learning intentions features further down, 0.56, so still providing a good return, it has to be seen that when you do scrutinise and look at all of the highly effective strategies, there will be overlaps. There will be things that perhaps are a cluster of other effective strategies that when they work together, when they work hand in hand, will actually give you that bigger return that you're looking for. You can see there emphasising success criteria 0.77. Feedback, again, another very high hitter. But when all of these come into play together, when you see the value of these, when you build these into classroom discussion, when it's feedback that's part of that, you can see how then they strengthen those strategies that you're using within your class, and you can see how they will give you that higher return when it's your estimates of achievement that you're sharing with the children, and that they can enjoy that success through these strategies being part of your teaching and learning experiences that you're offering your children. We look again here at what works from John Hattie and his effect sizes, and these rather are things that will have a positive impact on all children, because as we said, and as we know, our national priorities are about raising attainment for all, however, very mindful of closing the poverty-related attainment gap. And some of these interventions and strategies will support some learners better than others, and some will have an absolute positive impact and effect on children as part of when we consider closing that attainment gap. So you can see here the T and the S stands for teacher, and it's teacher's feedback. But we will revisit feedback in a webinar coming up soon, because again there are multi-layers to these interventions, and it's very much, although we're thinking of teacher feedback at this point, there of course there's many more approaches to that where you actually are involving the students or the children in your class. But again, a consideration for your case study for improvement: look at what return you will get from these interventions. Teacher clarity, again, that is multifaceted. That covers a huge range of your practice within the classroom. Teacher clarity can come from highly effective learning intention and success criteria. Teacher clarity can come from the feedback, so they are hand in hand again. Teacher clarity can be the level of instruction that you're giving, that can be that well-planned questioning that you're providing. So although we say here are the high hitters, here are the overarching statements, look what sits behind them to truly understand what the interventions are. Students' disposition to learn, of course, has a huge impact, and I would say particularly for every pupil, that they have the right attitude, the right mindset. And again, think back to that real high hitter that we saw there, way up at 1.62, where teachers considered the starting point of their children. If their starting point is and they're not in a very good position to learn, not got that readiness to learn, then that will be impacted. But you can see how that also impacts on things like challenge of goals. So again, all of these things coming into play and supporting each other, but in their own rights will give you this high return. So as you can see, slightly less in terms of homework, and the debate rages around homework, and I'm sure you'll have heard this before around homework, and it is one not to be discounted, certainly because it is giving us that return where we can see for most children. Now remember, this is particularly for most children when we're thinking about raising attainment for all. Homework will give us that return. However, again, dig deeper, look at the layers. It's about the type of homework. It's about the reasons for the homework. We know about parental engagement, and again, a webinar that will come up and show us the impact that has. Again, the homework has to be considered on all of those levels. What's giving us less of a return, and something perhaps we have to be cautious about, is simulation in games, and that's just using IT in the wrong kind of way, where it's children just engaging with games and there's not really any purpose or that kind of a challenge involved there too, or those kind of meaningless activities that they could perhaps engage in. And again, we'll go on and think about active learning and how we keep our children active in their learning and consider what that really means. And it certainly wouldn't just be simulation and games. So we can engage children in activities that do stimulate and challenge and progress their learning. Now we consider our disadvantaged pupils, and again we have aligned this to months in progress as opposed to the effect sizes, because we're dealing specifically with our disadvantaged pupils. And again, from your data you will know, having looked through looking at your data through those different lenses, that mean children may have multiple barriers to their learning in your classroom. We then have to consider slightly different strategies and interventions for them. Feedback is still up there. Our children who are living in that abject poverty need that feedback, they need that recognition, they need that reassurance, and you can see that the return will be. The indicators here in terms of the stars are in terms of the kind of labour, if you like, the workload involved in that, and not significant perhaps in terms of feedback, in terms of what planning and preparation are required there. That's a star rating there too in terms of what we can expect from this. Now, metacognition and self-regulation, we're going to revisit metacognition, and we're going to look to a case study of metacognition in one of the schools in Glasgow, St Thomas's Primary, where the deputy has led a whole school improvement and using the intervention metacognition, and a lot of this work around effect sizes has already been developed in St Thomas's, and we will see that in actual fact metacognition, thinking about thinking, children being aware of their own learning, and you'll hear Hattie talk about that, you will hear what he has to say, then you will begin to understand how we will equip our children, our disadvantaged children, or our children who are living in crisis, if we can equip them with multi ways to think, with many different approaches and strategies at their fingertips in terms of their learning. So this is something to consider when we are supporting our most disadvantaged children. Peer tutoring as well, children learning from each other, peer and self-assessment, of course, another very important element of supporting children's learning, but one that's particularly effective here. And early years intervention, of course, we see our children coming in with more and more barriers and more challenges, and it's important that we establish just what our interventions need to be. And we'll hear some case studies again from projects, case studies of improvement last year, where some highly effective early years interventions in primary one have been very effective, in particular in phonics. And you can see that phonics doesn't look like it's giving us such a high return there, 4 months. But in actual fact, it's because what we've understood and what some of our previous case studies for improvement have uncovered is the actual teaching of phonics, and are we teaching phonics correctly? And that has been really some fantastic piece of research by previous cohorts that will share with you some of their findings. One-to-one tuition, cooperative learning, again, all worth considering, children getting those skills to work with each other. And homework here, you can see there's a difference in homework here for our children that are disadvantaged. And again, reflect on that. Why is it giving a decent return for the majority of our pupils, but for our disadvantaged pupils? And I think you will be quite well equipped to arrive at that conclusion, because perhaps the parental support at home is not there, because perhaps the willingness, the engagement is perhaps not there in that home environment, the resources perhaps not there. So again, it's important when you consider what intervention it is that you're going to use as part of your case study for improvement, that it will give the return that you're looking for. While we do admire John Hattie's work and we recognise the wealth of information and research that we get from his works, we do encourage you to engage in a wide range of professional reading and to really do your research into what interventions that you're going to do. So we direct you to the Education Endowment Foundation, which is actually a charity set up by the Sutton Trust, and it is based in What Works Centre for Education. It is government designated, but it's primarily and morally aligned to supporting teachers and senior leaders to raise attainment and close the disadvantaged attainment gap. So a fabulous amount of research done here, and while we're recognising Hattie's, he has engaged in research around the world, Australia, United States, New Zealand, and Great Britain, of course, United Kingdom, primarily in England. The EEF has specific research for our own country, Scotland. So it's a very reliable and credible piece of research here, and it does look again, as it says, that moral obligation to support teachers. So it does look and see what works best for us in our Scottish schools. And behind each of these is a whole wealth of reading, and it has again it's an example just of what is working in our Scottish schools, and the codes here that we have, suggest the pound sign, low cost, but also on extensive evidence. So that's what the guide is here. And of course the numbers +5, +8 are in terms of the attainment in months that a child will gain. So collaborative learning, again, very, very important. We give children opportunities to do that, but how do we do that? Again, look a wee bit deeper at that, see what sits behind that in terms of good practice. Feedback, again, featuring yet again, metacognition and self-regulation. We know that's working in our schools, but again, important that we revisit that. Peer tutoring, again, what does that really mean for our children? So another piece of research for you to consider when you are looking at your data and establishing that intervention project for your case study. Another very good piece of research is Richard Elmore's Stages in Improvement, and he sums up for us quite well ways that we can increase learning and performance, and he keeps it very, very simple, and a very good analogy there. Making the trains run on time, or doing basic things better. Okay, look at your practice. We all know about questioning, we all know about feedback, we all know about children working collaboratively, we know about self-assessment, peer assessment, we know all of those things, but are we doing them as effectively as we can? Get those basic things right. Don't get lost and caught up in things that are perhaps not giving us the return that we need, that we want. Make the trains run on time. Don't get caught up with the train that's first class and has the Wi-Fi and air conditioning and fancy crockery for your tea. If it doesn't run on time, there's no point. So do the basic things better. We all want the trains to run on time. All those other add-ons and frills, if they're not giving us that one desire, our desire, raising attainment, then we don't do them. Get the basic things right. So here are the 3 ways that we can do that. You are testimony to this. We will need and we want to increase the knowledge and skill of teachers. You will hear Hattie talk about that that teachers deserve and need the credit for what they're doing, but what we must do is to increase their knowledge and their skill to become those highly effective practitioners that we're asking, and that is you, and you're already engaged in that process. Change the content. That is what your case study for improvement is asking. Do things differently. What is it that you're going to do differently? What have you heard from some of those effect sizes that we know are going to make the difference and raise attainment? Those interventions. And alter the relationship of the learner to the teacher and the content. So when we're considering questioning, what is the relationship with the teacher and the learner? When we're considering feedback, what is the relationship with the teacher and the learner? Now remember that high hitter that we saw, where it was teachers setting those goals and those challenges. That is how we alter the relationship of the learner to the teacher. And the content. What is the content? What is it that we are asking your children to do? Those three things are key. Keep those in mind when you're moving forward and identifying your intervention. And remember, what we have to bear in mind is privacy of practice produces isolation. You in your classroom on your door with your classroom door shut is being collegiate. And that is the enemy of improvement. Collaboration is when you work together, and I'm going to ask you to consider that in something that will ensure that this happens, called collective efficacy. So if we remember these things when we're considering our intervention, we will get that desired rise in attainment that we're looking for. So again, let's look back at highly effective strategies and considering Elmore's three main areas and how we can make a difference and improvement in our classrooms. As well as the teacher estimates of achievement, we can see 1.62 are a very, very promising return there for our pupils, and we consider Elmore's message around that. But what I have mentioned is collective teacher efficacy. This may be a new term to you. You may have heard of self-efficacy. And again, it is a very, very important strategy for children to have self-efficacy. And that's belief in themselves. So you can see how that would be clearly and closely linked to your teacher, your estimates of their achievements and what you believe they can do. But consider us, the teachers. Collective teacher efficacy is a collective belief of teachers and their ability to positively affect student attainment. Again, it links us back to our features of a highly effective school. If we're a collaborative school, if we are getting opportunities to work together, look at the return that we have on this. So again, as you're considering your case study for improvement, are there opportunities for you to work collectively, well, particularly in your trios, but especially at school level? Because as you know, leadership is key. That has been identified, but it's leadership at all levels. It's leadership of you. You're the leader in your classroom, and you will be engaging in that leadership when you're identifying your intervention. But working collectively, you can see the return here that we will receive in terms of effectiveness. And it is 1.57 and is strongly correlated with student achievement. Finally, in your considerations for your case study for improvement, we direct you to the link to the John Hattie presentation, and it explores a wee bit more into the effect sizes and the different range of interventions that can happen in your classroom, and perhaps will inform your next steps and consideration in your interventions. But I think here this just reminds us that we don't want to be typical in our interventions. We don't want to be below that 4. We want to have something that's certainly at least our 0.4 hinge point, and that you can choose an intervention that will indeed enhance the teaching and learning in your class.